Alrighty, gang. Here's to nights that turn into mornings and friends that turn into family. Cheers!
Happy birthday to you.
Hello. Welcome to the Friendship IRL podcast. I'm your host, Alex Alexander, and each week we explore what's working and what's not in our friendships, community, and connections. Have you ever wished you could sit down and have a conversation about what is really going on in your friendships? Well, you found your people. Join us as we dive into real-life stories and explore new ways to approach these connections. Together, we're reimagining the rules of friendship. Let's imagine for just a second that you made that move you've always dreamed of. It might be across the state, across the country, maybe it's across the world. You're only going to move there for a year or two. But man, the memories you are going to make in that year or two, the person you're going to discover, the new version of yourself. And because this is just a short stint that you're there, let's imagine that when you move back home, you feel like you no longer quite fit in with your old friends. How do you navigate relationships when life-altering experiences have fundamentally altered who you are? Our guest today is Linda Mueller, and Linda has lived this challenge firsthand. She is a certified life coach and mentor, specializing in empowering international women through the complex journey of relocation and repatriation. Her expertise comes from personal experience. 7 international moves over 13 years, bouncing in and out of her passport country, the US. In this episode, we dive into the intricacies of maintaining and rekindling friendships after significant life changes. While Linda's story centers on international relocations, I firmly believe that there are so many takeaways in this episode that can apply to a wide array of life's transformative experiences. It might be that moving abroad for you, but it could also be somebody who's gone quiet on their friends for an extended period of time while they start their sobriety journey. It could be somebody who has left a religion, stabilized their life, and decides they want to see if there are any old connections they can bring back into their life. Or, as I've talked about in many episodes before, this could be someone who has experienced a profound loss and they are no longer the same person they were before. I think if you are anybody who feels like you're a different version of yourself, and you're trying to bring that new version into established friendships, you will find valuable takeaways in today's episode. We explore questions like, how do you reconnect with old friends when you become a different version of yourself? What's the importance of forming new connections while also honoring existing ones? And how do we develop the habits and skills necessary for nurturing meaningful friendships amidst life's constant changes? Now, I'm one of those people who believes that change is the only constant in this world, that we really need to dive into the strategies for riding those waves of transformation rather than fighting against them. So whether you are a global nomad or just somebody who is navigating personal growth closer to home, this episode promises insights that will resonate with your journey and perhaps even transform how you approach your friendships, community, and connections. Let's dive into today's episode. Hi, Linda. Welcome to the Friendship IRL podcast. I'm excited that you're here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about where you've lived and how long you were gone? I guess maybe where you're from too, where you've moved back to.
Sure. Well, I've moved around quite a bit, actually, so domestically and internationally. So I'm originally from Philadelphia. At least that's where I lived the longest as a child. Graduated from high school, but I've lived abroad in France and Norway and the Netherlands as a student. And then as an adult with my family, we lived in Tokyo twice, Abu Dhabi, and London. And we have used Chicago as our family's home base since 2012. But we've only lived here full time for about half of that time.
Yeah, you really have been all over. And now I have so many questions about so many places that you've lived, but we don't need to get into that. Tell me a little bit about like choosing to move away with your family, right? Like I feel like that's so exciting. But I also know watching friends, having done this, having gone and like lived an expat life, you're also kind of like splitting your not identity, but like you move and build this new life, but you also have all these people you love at home. And there's just this like constant tug both ways. Like you're never fully in one place, it kind of feels like when I talk to people. Did you have a similar experience or different?
Oh, definitely. I think when you move around, when you're globally or domestically mobile, it's sort of like you almost have to build a home within you because you start to feel a little bit like you don't fit anywhere. I actually experienced that when I lived in the US because I'm from the East Coast for the most part. And then I was living in the Midwest. And I remember friends back in Philadelphia would say, "Oh, you've lost your edge." Well, first of all, I didn't realize I had an edge. So I was pretty excited about that. And then in Minnesota, people thought I was really kind of direct. And so I thought, where do I really fit? Then when you move overseas, it's for me at least, it was a whole nother level of, I lost my identity as a corporate employee and I became an accompanying spouse. And so all of a sudden people had a perception of who I was in that role. And then I moved back and I realized, or even just keeping in touch with people back at home, I realized that they had a whole nother perception of who I was at this point in my life. So it does get quite jumbled up.
Yeah. I mean, listening to you say that. So I have this whole framework that I won't talk too much about, but it kind of talks about like the ways we're connected to our people and gives people this language. And one of them is, I call them emotional intimacy roots, but there's a couple categories under that. And one of them is like the details you know about someone. And I think that's so interesting when we're talking about this idea of moving, abroad, but anywhere, like you were saying, you move somewhere else and you learn so much about yourself, you try new things, and suddenly when you come home, the details that someone who maybe has known you for a really long time, like knew about you, this is Linda, they might be different. And there's this weird thing that happens where your friends then are like, what happened to you? And like nothing wrong, nothing bad happened. We just need to start talking about the fact that we're all growing and changing. And I think that that really accelerates when you're someone who's moving around more. If you have been hanging around the podcast for a while, hearing about my roots framework, this is surely not your first time. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, I would highly suggest going to listen to episode 12, way back in the archives. It's called Digging into the 3 Types of Roots. It has to do with my roots of friendship framework that I developed. It's like my working thesis I have put out there in the world that I hope we all talk about and use and changes maybe in my lifetime because we have enough conversation that people are pointing things out to me. Like, I'm not saying I know it all here. I'm just trying to give something to start the conversation. Really, that's what this framework is. You can go listen to the whole thing in episode 12. What I'm talking about here is one of the 3 types of roots called emotional intimacy roots. There are a few types of emotional intimacy roots. And the one specifically I'm talking about is the details we know about each other. And the reason I'm pointing that out in this episode is when we have friends, we start to learn things about each other, right? I'm going to really simplify this. So I might learn that my friend loves chocolate chip cookies. Their favorite color is blue. They love soccer, right? We gain all these little details that we tuck away and we use that information to then show up in ways that tell our friend, like, I know you. So that could mean it's this friend's birthday and you show up with chocolate chip cookies and blue balloons. Now, what happens here is the things we know about each other change all the time, right? Because I'm a dynamic, growing, changing person. So although I might have loved chocolate chip cookies for years, maybe I had the best chocolate cake of my life last year. And now I want that chocolate cake from Daru Bakery in Kirkland. If you're Seattle local, you might know what that is. I want that cake for my birthday for the foreseeable future. And the people I'm with all the time might have heard me talk all about the cake. Like they've updated this piece of information in their heads. They know she used to love chocolate chip cookies, but now she wants this chocolate cake. And what happens is, if we have friendships where a bunch of time has passed or we have had a big change, a ton of these information pieces might have changed all at once, right? When you become a new version of yourself, there could be so many things that change. You might have enjoyed going out drinking at one point, and now you don't drink anymore. You might have loved blue, and now you couldn't possibly pick a favorite color. You want everything to be rainbow splatter all over the place. Like, you come back, you spend time with your friends, and they start to say things like, wow, you were a completely different version of yourself, because you are. But I think what happens is, as friends, we start to be like, well, do I even know you? And we use it as kind of this sign that something's wrong in our friendship. And that's what I'm trying to show you here. Like, nothing's wrong. Things have just changed and you need to update your information. But we get in our heads and we're like, man, am I a bad friend? I didn't know all this stuff about my friend. Or we get weird. We're like, well, they're completely different. I don't even know them anymore. But like, really, if we just take a step back, all that's happened here is they have grown, they have changed. We have new information. They used to like chocolate chip cookies. Now they like chocolate cake. Okay, noted. Excited to try the chocolate cake.
I've always felt like moving abroad where you have to start over from base zero really, it can bring up things that normally in your everyday busy life, maybe you would keep squashed down because all of a sudden you're in this new place and you don't have a group of friends yet or a way to keep your calendar full, or especially with meaningful things. So that can sometimes bring things to the surface. But another aspect is that when you move, a lot of times you evolve, you have, like you were saying, new experiences. And at the same time, your friends back home, their lives go on as well. And maybe you have more insight into what's going on in their life and how their lives are progressing because you can relate to it having lived there. But, then it gets a little bit more jumbled because they sometimes think they know what your life is like from social media and whatnot, but they aren't actually experiencing it. So their perception may be off a little bit. So it can be a little bit complicated with friendships for sure.
Yeah, it's funny you say the thing about like they know what your life looks like. I mean, I've experienced that a little bit, like going to visit friends who are expats abroad and staying with them for like a week at a time and be like, oh, okay. I mean, now I know, right? And that has strengthened our friendship, and not everyone can do that. I get that. But I saw this travel blogger actually recently who did like a day, I think she did like a week in the life, where she really showed all the parts where you didn't read the sign correctly because you don't actually fully speak that language. And so the train you were supposed to take, now you're laying on the floor in the train station for 6 hours. But of course, the video or the photo she's posting that day, or the reel or whatever, is her at the site, like at the Instagram, perfect, whatever. And she did a whole week of this, like all the times where something went wrong, or they lost something, or they ordered what they thought was a full meal of food and this tiny bowl arrived. All to say, like, we don't know what other people are experiencing. And although we might glamorize it, it's not always that glamorous.
Well, I think on the other side, the same thing can happen. You can look at, when you're the one living overseas, you can look at your friends back home and think, oh, their lives are so easy because it's the routine and they speak the language and they know what to expect. But that's not always the case either. So I think it comes from both directions, and it really can take a lot of effort to really stay in touch with what's going on a deeper level with friends when you're living apart.
Yeah. It makes me think of this thing. Like, sometimes I think about how before we had so much technology at our fingertips all the time, when you moved away, you just kind of like let people go. Like, sure, maybe you kept in touch with letter writing or whatever, but we never held this many people in our brain that we like know them. and I'm saying that in air quotes for anybody that can't see me, that we know them, without actually knowing them, without them like living in our town and seeing them all the time.
It's really true.
Now we're trying to say that we know, again, in quotes, all these people, but we, again, are just seeing like the highlight reels or what we see on the internet, or even if they're trying to show us like the real life, you aren't there, so you don't know. And we're like really trying to believe that we know, but we don't. Having to balance that in our brains is definitely something newer.
It's true. And I think on a baseline as humans, we look at everything through our own filter. So that doesn't have anything to do with whether or not where you live. It's just like we're always looking at other people through our own filter. It really takes a lot of effort to look without your own filter at somebody else's situation. So add the international aspect to it, and it can really cause some level of distance. I mean, I think back to my early days of living abroad, and it was just letter writing. And I thankfully still have a lot of those letters. And I love the detail that's in them, because that's something that I think does get lost when it's one thing if you're emailing people, which doesn't really even seem to happen that often now that we can FaceTime or WhatsApp video and whatever else. So I think there's a lost art there of really connecting on that deeper level, because something happens when you put pen to paper that we've lost even just in typing. So there's sort of an intimacy that you can have with your friends when you're processing through from your brain down through pen to paper.
Yeah, I was going to say it's like the time, like the reflection time of like, I really want you to understand the details of this. That sometimes gets lost, I think, when we have the option to like the immediacy of like just clicking the FaceTime button and chatting really quick. So obviously you like had a lot of life experience and lived a lot of things and became, I want to say, like a little bit of a new version of yourself. What was it like when you moved back to Chicago?
Well, let's see. What was it like? I've repatriated multiple times, and I think that has helped me because I know what to expect, because there's a thing called reverse culture shock, which a lot of people that move overseas don't get informed about, and then they're shocked by it. So I knew to expect it, and which helped me go through it. It's almost like you have culture shock with your own culture, which can be really difficult. We were living in London, and I wasn't happy to leave London. We had a beautiful life there, but for a variety of reasons, we chose to come back. So there was that level of choice. And I was excited because I like Chicago and I had friends here. We actually had a house to go back into. So on so many levels, it was a great repatriation situation. But what I realized after the newness of it wore off was that being a visitor in your adopted hometown is very different from being a full-time resident of your hometown. So I was welcomed back by my friends, and it was a beautiful few months of reunions. But I also realized that their lives had moved on. Their children were older. Most of my friends here had families, and their jobs, in many cases, had gotten bigger. So they were busier with that. And like you said, I had changed and I had different goals and ambitions for myself. And so I really had to step back and think about, who do I want in my life? And I wanted all of my old friends, but I also wanted to keep my international mindset, so to speak, going. And that meant bringing other people into my life that wanted to do the things that I wanted to do as well.
I love that you're saying that, because so often I think that there's so much focus on what we can cut out, when in fact, if we add, that often like will fulfill our needs. And then you can allow those other friendships, ones you came back to, I'm not saying that came back for them, but they were here. You can let them flourish in their own ways, but there isn't as much like pressure on them. Again, like filling all your needs. You're saying you want to keep yourself kind of in this worldly view instead of trying to force these people and being mad. I love that your instinct was to add, because I talk to a lot of people where their instinct is not to add. It is to add more boundaries to their old relationships, to get frustrated. They can't figure out why it's not working. And quite often it's because they're trying to ask things that don't fit.
It's a really good point.
When you were looking for people to add, what kind of people were you looking for? Like people with certain interests, people that did certain activities? What kind of people were you looking to add when you moved back?
All of the above. I was really looking to add people that had interest in just trying new things. And, my friends always have been interested in that. But I also found that a lot of people just lacked time. I think that's sort of the American way. So I was really looking for people who wanted to do things that are similar to myself, but also had the time to do it. And I just really had to put myself out there. I mean, I always look at it as a bit of an experiment. And I didn't just leave my previous friends in a bucket. I tried to incorporate them in the things that I knew that they would also enjoy. Like, I'm going to go try this. Do you want to come? There might be some people that you haven't met yet, but it'll be fun. And, really trying to be inclusive, because I just, again, it's that additive factor. Like, we can all have something fun to do. And a lot of my friends that I'd had from the old days would say, oh, you're so good at organizing, or you're so good at coming up with new things to do. And so that really made me realize that it's not anything personal. It's just some people have the time and energy to look for those things and other people don't. It doesn't mean they don't want to do them. So I just think keeping a really open mind and just being willing to experiment was like really the key for me.
If this is somewhere you want to go deeper, I would suggest going to listen to episode 87, Spring Cleaning Your Friendships Through Life's Transitions with Emily Rogers. These are very connected episodes. I didn't plan it that way, but it worked out that way. The other thing I want to note here is that I talk a lot about adding. I love adding. And I often talk about adding an entire interest or activity. But here, Linda is talking about filtering people by looking for people who have a certain, I guess almost like lifestyle, a certain ability, a certain characteristic. I don't know quite the right term here, but she's looking for people who have a similar freedom of time as her. And I just wanted to point that out because, again, I talk a lot about adding, looking for people based on a certain interest. People who also like movies or bird watching or Dungeons and Dragons or extreme canoeing. I don't know, whatever interest you have. But you can also filter people by certain characteristics. And that might be the place to look to add to your circles.
This is such a beautiful example of when I say, you came back as a new version of yourself, you came back as somebody who, the reverse culture shock, who saw how Americans make themselves so busy and don't leave any time. And you didn't want to repeat that. And you wanted people who, maybe didn't take as much convincing, or their lives weren't so full of things. They had more time for free time, whatever. You came back with this new version, but you allowed your friends who lived here into that. Because I'm sure to them, it was like, wow, Linda's really changed. And there's nothing wrong with that. You just let them into all the joys of the change.
It's interesting for me because I'm not from Chicago. So when my friends here, most of them met me, I had a 3-year-old. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of our activities were kind of family focused, unless we all could get babysitters. And I had moved here from Tokyo. So they knew me as an international person. So I think to a certain extent, they sort of expect that I'm going to be the one raising my hand saying, hey, let's do this, let's do that. I also only have one child. Many of my friends have 2, 3 plus kids. And so because of life circumstances, I know I'm in a very different position than many of them are. What I find really interesting is that sometimes people say they don't have time to do things, but when you throw out something that they really want to do, then they make the time to do it. So all of that to say, I've just found that I have to not take a lot of things personally and just let them be. If people want to participate, great. And if not, then maybe next time, and just sort of keep doing my own thing. Some people think I'm a bit odd because I am always interested in meeting new people and experimenting, because it doesn't always go well, right? Sometimes you end up meeting people and you don't really click and whatnot. But for me, at one point in my life, because we were just bouncing around so much, I just had to step back and say, okay, I love living overseas. I love living, in different cultures. Like, but what is it that I like about it? And how can I replicate that anywhere I am? Because the reality is, while I always like to look at our moves as a choice, some choices are more forced than others. And, that's something that's not really within my control. So I just have to go with it.
I really love what you're saying about like looking at what you like about that move. And as somebody who has never moved abroad but always wants to move abroad, personally, I'm going to reflect on that. Like, what is it about moving abroad that I want? And also like the awkwardness of meeting new people. I mean, I think what I have seen of my friends who have moved abroad, like the people I know, right, is you get so thrown outside your comfort zone that everything you do on a day-to-day basis is unfamiliar. I mean, while that is uncomfortable, once you kind of get used to that and that becomes okay, you're like, it's fine. I'll figure out how to make it through this situation. Like, it may not be super graceful. People might look at me. I might walk away from the situation and like not have gotten the thing I came here for, but I'm going to figure it out. Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, I wonder that so aligns with what is necessary to continually put yourself out there and meet new people. Because that's part of it, is like meeting new people is like you were saying, it doesn't always work out. Sometimes it's awkward. You're trying to figure each other out. Maybe you get together again, maybe you don't. You feel a little weird, like putting yourself out there and saying, hey, I really enjoyed going to that gallery opening with you. Do you want to hang out again? Like, we can feel like that's a little direct.
Right.
And you've really honed in that skill set having lived abroad so many times.
It becomes vital. I mean, I think community is the key to success in a globally mobile life. And it's however you choose to define, right? We meet friends of convenience because perhaps they go to the same coffee shop we do every Monday morning and we see each other and it's nice to have a little chat, but they might not fill that next level of need that you have in terms of intimacy with a friend, vulnerability, whatever it may be. And so then you kind of have to think like, well, where do I need to go? And what do I need to do to meet those people that I can connect with on that level? And it's amazing to me how many people just aren't willing to do it. I mean, I have friends in Chicago that aren't from here originally that'll tell me they don't have enough friends. Their lives are kind of boring. But then when I suggest going to do something that's a bit new or with a different group of people, sometimes the response is, I could never do that. What if they're weird? What if you don't like them? What if? And I always think to myself, well, that's one way to choose to live your life, but it's not a way to grow. I mean, I love to think of myself as a person who has a growth mindset. I make a lot of mistakes in life, but I also just try to keep going and to learn from them. And so I don't really look at them like mistakes. And I just think, no matter where you live, and I do say that a lot of the advice I would give somebody about, how to have an international mindset when you're living in your passport country is biased because I live in a big city where there's a lot of opportunities. I know some people move to really small towns. Maybe they've lived there their whole life and they're trying to fit back into, like you said earlier, like the round peg in a square hole.
Yeah.
But there's always a way, for example, if you like to travel and you say, well, I'm on a tight budget, I can't travel. Well, there's always places that you can either decide, like, instead of taking a bunch of vacations, like perhaps you did when you were living abroad, maybe you just take one big vacation. And big, define it however you want, or maybe instead of flying around, you take car trips. I mean, there's always a way to replicate the core desire that you have. And also always ways to uncover other people. I mean, I've had people say to me like, well, I live in a small town and nobody's interested in XYZ. Really? Nobody in the entire town is interested in XYZ. Like, what have you done to validate that statement? So that doesn't mean to discount how hard it may be to uncover those people, but I think it's worth at least trying. And you never know, as you're experimenting, trying, whatever you want to call it, what you'll uncover along the way.
Well, so that was kind of why I was asking you earlier about what you were looking to add, because I really think there's something to be said about people walk around, right, just saying like, I want to make friends. My life is boring, this and that. It's like, okay, well, what do you want? Because if you walk outside and you say, I want to make new friends, and then you go from, I don't know, an office to the street to a parking lot to a shopping center. Like, that's a lot of people. How are you looking at all those people, all those faces that kind of just meld together, and determining if there's somebody you'd want to be friends with? Like, no wonder people are overwhelmed. But there's something to be said when you say, you know, I want people who enjoy art. And one, you know, places you can go to find people. You know, you can go to a gallery, you can go to a class, you can go to, I mean, even in a small town, I'm sure there are artists you could go specifically seek out, right? You have a filter. And then when you get there, you can start talking to people and getting more connected. You also, as you move through just your day to day, as you're in your office or that shopping center or whatever, and you're talking to that random person that you feel awkward with, you can say things like, I'm really looking to connect with more people who are interested in art. And they might say, oh, I've been watching all these documentaries, or I've been learning photography. Or they might say, oh yeah, art's not really my thing, but have you met so-and-so? Like, I think a lot of the reason people are overwhelmed is because they just haven't really thought through what they want to add. I mean, even your filter, what you kind of said is like you came back and you wanted people who wanted to try new things. And I feel like that's a pretty easy filter, although it seems like a big one, because when you're talking to someone new, you can just throw out something you've been wanting to try. And if they seem on board, great, let's set that up. And if they seem a little like, I don't know if I could find time for that. That would make me nervous. That would this, that would that. You just would be like, okay, well, I don't know if this is going to be the right fit. So anybody out there, but I think specific to this episode, if you're moving back to where you lived, even if it's a small town, think about what it is that you want to add.
And I would add to that, think about what you want to add. And if it doesn't exist, what can you do to create it? And I mean, there's amazing technology out there. There's Facebook groups, there's meetups, and you can't expect it to happen overnight, but it's like, what's your role in this? You know, I created a group for international women in Chicago. I tried joining ones that existed. And they were amazing in some ways, but I also saw a gap and I decided to fill it. And now when I get together with these people, like I hear comments like, wow, every time I come, people are so nice. Or, oh, I felt so welcome. I felt awkward coming, but when I got here, it was really comfortable. And it's like, these are my people, because they're people that felt uncomfortable, but they were willing to try it. And when they came, it was fine. Now, people get busy. People can't come consistently sometimes. But that's one of the reasons why I created a Facebook group, because that way people can hop in and out. And in between in-person meetups, they can still connect virtually, even if they can't connect in person. So I just wanted to create this welcoming environment that I felt like was missing for women with international experience in Chicago. And I'm enjoying it myself. So I'm thinking like, oh, well, you know, what's in it for me as well as for everyone else? Because there needs to be a give and take in relationships and in how you spend your time and energy. And so, you know, that's the path that I've chosen to go down. But I've also done the meetup route. I'm a member of a bunch of different Facebook groups that are related to Chicago. And I definitely read a lot about people. I'm like, oh, no, that doesn't seem like my person. So, I mean, it takes time. But, you know, also, what are you looking for? Like, some people just need that one best friend. And so what do they need to do to go about finding that person? Other people like to have a larger group of friends and to different degrees of closeness. And so, I mean, anything goes. But I think, like you said earlier, it's really getting in touch with who you are and maybe even who you want to be, and then making sure how you're living your life is aligned with what you're saying. I mean, I have a child, and for the last couple of years, she needed a lot of my time and attention that didn't leave as much time to do things that I personally wanted to do. And I struggled with that a bit. But the reality is, because I'm clear on what's important to me, I was willing to make that trade-off, because I knew being the type of mom I was being was important to me. And I knew I could pick up the other things when the future rolled in. Now, that doesn't mean I put all of my own hopes and dreams on hold for all that time. I just had to focus on them to a lesser extent. And you know what? I'm glad, because I have a 14-year-old and she still talks to me and she still tells me things. And so that to me shows that the way I chose to balance my life worked for my situation. And also, I just said the word balance, but really I like to think about work-life balance or family and life balance more as harmony, because balance, I think, makes us think that it's got to be 50-50. And that's not life. But if we're thinking about it in terms of harmony, then I think that makes it a lot easier to, know what's important to us and make sure we have enough of that in our lives, even if we can't have as much as we would like all the time.
I mean, you just said so many things in there that are, nobody could see me, but I was like happily telling you to keep going. Like, yeah, so many good things in that segment. But like, I follow this woman, her name is Sunir Madani, and she was a CEO of a billion-dollar company, whatever. And she talks about this idea that, I love her visual. She talks about like, we're all juggling and you can only juggle so many balls at one time. And that doesn't mean that you've dropped the ball, but sometimes you have to set a ball down. Like in this moment in life, you have to decide what balls are made of glass and what balls are plastic. So to complete that visual, you're juggling balls. Some of them you got to set down right now, whether they're plastic or glass. Like you just don't have as much space for them. And the ones you are juggling, you have to decide which ones are glass and which ones are plastic. Because if you drop one, you want it to be a plastic one and you want to know which one that is. So it sounds like you made the decision that your relationship with your daughter was glass, and that one had to be protected amongst all the ones you were juggling. And although you maybe had some other ones in there, that one couldn't be dropped. And if you were going to let one that you were actually juggling fall on the ground, it was like a plastic one. But I love you saying that, because the point of this podcast and my work and whatever isn't like that friendship and community always needs to be your top priority, your glass ball. But I think a lot of people leave community and friendship on the floor. And there are going to be moments where it is a glass ball, and there's going to be moments where it's a plastic ball that you are juggling. And there's going to be moments where it's on the floor, and that's okay. But if it's always on the floor, as it seems to be for a good number of people, then you're really robbing yourself of all the positives that come from having supportive people around you, having people that you can have fun with, that bring you joy. Like there's so many reasons to not just leave community and friendship on the floor all the time.
I love that visual of the juggling. I'm going to have to get that woman's name from you so I can follow her too.
Right? It's just like such a good reminder. In my mind, it's like that some things in this moment are the top priority. And that's great. And like we should know that. And then other things can bend around that in this current time. But it doesn't always have to be the glass ball.
Right. Well, and I think, what in line with what you're saying, like it's really important to make time for friends. It probably can't be all the time, but like we all need to have those friends or we're fortunate to have those friends that maybe we don't speak to all the time, but when we pick up with them, it's just like old times and there's no discussion around, well, it's been this long and I can't, in terms of it being bad that you hadn't spoken in that long. And so, I have always been one to focus on maintaining friendships. And so I feel fortunate now with all the moving that I've done that some of my very best friends I don't get to see or talk to that often, but I know if I call them that we'll just pick right up where we left off. So that's really important to me. Maybe they're made out of high-tech glass. I don't know, like when they balance instead of break. But I think that's really vital as well in terms of, when we look at the types of friends, we can have those friends that are with us in our current environment, but then also who are those other friends that we have that we can really depend on long term.
I call those historic friends. I have like a term for that because basically like our beliefs about those friendships are pretty solid. So it's okay to go long periods of time, but you have all this history and memories together. You know a good amount about each other. So it's just like really easy to drop in and out. But for whatever reason, currently you just don't like live life with them day to day. And especially in your situation, people that you maybe did live life with day to day when you lived in London or Abu Dhabi, or, they were the people you got together for dinner with. You saw them around. They were neighbors. They were coworkers. They were whatever. And now you obviously live on opposite sides of the world, likely, I guess, or maybe just not even in the same city, but you can drop in or drop out. I was going to ask you about that. Like, what is it like balancing now that you're back in Chicago, all your friendships with people who still either live in the place you met them or just like don't live in Chicago?
Well, I am fortunate that Chicago is a big city. And another aspect is that people come through for business and other reasons. So this morning I had breakfast with a friend from Tokyo that I've known since 2005. And she just happened to have business reasons to come through Chicago. And so we got to reconnect. And it was one of those like pick up like it was old times, even though we haven't spoken much in the last probably 4 or 5 years. Like I said earlier, I do really focus on maintaining friendships. So I will be the one that sends a message saying, oh, hey, it's been a while, let's catch up. And so that served me well because then I can stay current with those historical friends. That being said, I do think it's also really important to, sometimes friendships, they don't have the same luster that they did at a different point in your life. And I think it's important to recognize that. It doesn't mean that you have to part on bad terms, but I think we need to invest our time and energy in places where it's returned to some extent. And in some way, shape, or form. It doesn't have to be 50-50. But I guess we could start talking about friendship harmony as well instead of friendship balances or balancing. But I keep in touch with, I have some of my oldest friends I've known since middle school. And I have current relationships with them because I'm lucky they still live near my family. And when I go back to visit them, I can see my friends as well. And we talk in between. So I definitely invest the effort in it. And I know that's not the norm.
Well, we'd love it for it to be the norm.
Right. Well, and for me, I kind of look at them as my anchors, right? Like with all the bouncing around that I've done, like knowing that I have certain people from different periods of my life that I can go back to really helps keep me grounded. Like in the times when I'm thinking, wow, I've moved around so much. And part of the downside of that is that I haven't had that time to necessarily build that long-term relationship with people that I just didn't have the opportunity to get to know as well. When we moved to Abu Dhabi, we thought we were going to be there 5 years and we ended up leaving 14 months later. So that's probably been one of the hardest things for me when I've left my host countries, has just been saying goodbye to people that are from Australia or South Africa and I may never see them again. That's probably been the hardest part for me.
I mean, again, I have not lived this life. I think about this life, but now your point, this is the joy of this podcast is you're like, these are the positives and these are the hard parts. Cause I'm sure you met people that were great that you were really excited to connect with. And then, it's like, oh, well, we're moving. I did another podcast interview. It has been released at this point. This woman was saying she's a military spouse that after a few moves, she realized that her take on friendship is like when you move into a new house, a new apartment, a new whatever, and you're in that weird phase where you're like, oh, I'm only going to be here potentially for 9 months, 14 months. Like, do I even put stuff on the walls? And you have to decide, do I want to feel a little more comfortable in my own home for the 12 months I'm here? Or do I want to just feel like I'm in this awkward temporary phase for 12 months? Like, what are you going to choose? And she's like, I've learned that I'm happier when I always put stuff on the walls. And this was a metaphor for like, get out there and meet some new people, even if it means you're going to have to leave and you were really excited to have met them. It makes your time there so much richer.
Definitely.
And memorable.
Well, and you never really know, right? I mean, we moved to Abu Dhabi thinking 5 years. We moved to London thinking 5 to 7, and both of them were less than 2. So you don't really know. I mean, there's a woman who's one of my dearest friends to this day, and we make an effort to talk once a month. We met in Japan. She'd been there for a really long time. And she basically said to me, I don't want to get to be friends with you because you're going to leave. And I somehow made her be friends with me. And then I left. And she said, I knew you were going to do this. We were such good friends at that point. She threw me what we called a sayonara party. And then I called her up one day. She was living in the UK at this point. And I said, guess what? I'm moving to London. So it's just funny. Like, I think if you just go with the flow, you never know. People can circle back in and out of your life in ways that you would never expect. And you also never know how long you're going to be in a place. Now, maybe if you're in the military and it's a set moving schedule, you do. But for a lot of people that are either moving on their own or they're on a corporate track, I mean, a lot of times you don't know. I met many, many people that moved to Tokyo for 3 to 5 years and they were still there 20 years later. So
Yeah.
you never know. So I like that idea of like hang the pictures, like go all in.
Yeah. Well, because then you, on the flip side, I mean, I get people who contact me who end up, they're 10 years in to having been in Tokyo and they thought they would be there a year. But every time it's like, oh, am I leaving? Oh, am I leaving? I don't know. And so they just never lean in. They have no community. And now they're in this weird place where they feel like they've wasted all this time not making these connections and they still don't know how long they're going to be there. I mean, to anybody out there who's thinking about that, it's not that you necessarily have to build this huge, thriving community in 12 months, but like maybe you've made, 1 or 2 friends. Maybe you'll stay in touch with them. Maybe you won't. Maybe they're just like the memories you have of that place. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I get a lot of people who come to me with like regret and then they feel like it's too late. And of course, I'm like, it's never too late. But I like what you're saying. Like, you just never know.
I mean, I completely agree with what you're saying. When I meet people as they're about to go overseas, I will always say to them, why don't you start trying to build your community before you go? Because then when you land, you have people that you can have a coffee with or somebody that you can call when you say, I'm trying to hook up my internet and this and that's happening. What do I do? That just to give you information. And maybe you become great friends with them and maybe you don't, but at least you have that entree into starting to build your community and figuring out how to expand it right when you get there. Because I think some people move and then they feel like they need to get everything settled and put a bow on top and then they can start building their community. And that's a slippery slope because you need that community around you while you're going through those early stages of culture shock, basically. So, and that can happen whether you're moving domestically or internationally. I mean, I've moved around the US quite a bit and the culture is very different and very in different parts of our country, as many of us know. So I think it's just really important to start building community as soon as possible. And I definitely agree, it's never too late. One thing that I've seen is that people will come to me and say, well, when I was here before, I was part of this community at my child's school, but now my child's gone off to college or my child switched schools. And all of a sudden I realized those were all friends of convenience. And now I don't have them because I'm in a different situation. What do I do? And needing to make friends and community can happen at any point in your life. So I think it's important to definitely keep some level of focus on that aspect of life, if that's something that's important to you.
Yeah, it's just like pay attention to it, give it a little. A lot of people haven't really spent much time at all thinking about what they have, what they want, what they wish this looked like, what they're doing. And, this doesn't need to be some huge thing. Like, I think that it's similar to, I don't know, if you learn to play an instrument, if you learn to play guitar, like I don't play guitar, it would be very overwhelming for me to learn, like even think about doing it, right? And then I would find some resources and I would learn the skills. And after a while, it just becomes like second nature to be able to pick up the guitar in the right way and do this thing. You don't have to think so much about it. When we learn anything, it's that way. And I think that seeing friendship and community as a habit and a skill is no different. If you aren't seeing it as that, you're not paying any attention to it. When you start to pay attention to it, you're probably pretty overwhelmed because you might realize it's not what you want. But when it becomes something like what you and I are doing, right? You're saying like you kind of always keep your pulse on this and sometimes it's not your first priority, but you're still like paying attention to it. It becomes kind of second nature. You just like are driving your car or on your commute and you're kind of thinking about it and you're like, oh, I should invest a little more energy or I should reach out to that person or I wish I had more people to bike ride with. And you kind of keep that, at the forefront of your mind and you have some sense of what it would take to reach out to those people or the places you would go and you do it. Like it just kind of becomes this thing that isn't as overwhelming that like weaves into your life, I think.
For sure.
When it becomes something that you allow to be a priority.
Well, and there's, habit stacking has become kind of a buzz phrase. And I try to do that with my friends. Like I'm as busy as the next person, but you know what? I need to exercise. So why don't I call a friend and say, hey, let's go for a walk instead of meeting for lunch? Or I don't know, anything. Like I go pick my daughter up at school and I end up with a half hour where I have to wait for her. Well, who can I call just to have a quick catch up? It doesn't even have to be a deep conversation. Like if something reminds me of a friend, I'll send a quick text to be like, oh, I just saw such and such. And it made me think of you. How are you doing? Like there's all different ways to keep friendships fresh and to grow them. Just that touch, like whatever feels comfortable to you. I'm the queen of taking a picture of something and sending it and saying like, oh, I saw this and it made me think of you. And then people feel good. Like, how does it feel for you when you get one of those pictures or quick texts? Like, I was thinking of you. Like, it feels great.
Yes. Like that reminded me of you. It takes people back, especially like what you were saying earlier about people who know you in different times of your life. So only certain people maybe could. So I did this. This was a while ago, like a year ago. There was a car. I'm not going to say what kind of car because it's a very specific car and people would know. People that know me would know. But I saw this car and it's the car of a guy I dated in high school. And it's like a very specific car. And I took a photo of it and I sent it to one of my closest friends from high school. And I just was like, these even exist anymore? Because it was a very rare car. And she just, she's messaging back like, oh my gosh. And she's throwing out like memories and this and that. And she's like one of the only people who would know that car. So going back to what we were saying earlier about people knowing you from specific parts of life, like that's nice that someone else has those memories from a period of your life that like maybe other people didn't know you.
For sure.
You trigger that by like just sending that photo.
And it keeps your relationship current too, because then you have a chance to check in what's going on with you today. So that way it's not just getting together and talking about the good old days. And that can be fun. But it's like, what can you do to make those relationships current?
Yeah. At the end of, her spouting all these memories, me saying like, what were you up to this week? How's this week? I mean, we talk pretty regularly, but sometimes we go spurts and like, or what was your day like? How was that thing? Right. It's the lead in versus having to just send the how was your week text. Like when you're already in the flow, sometimes it's a little easier than if you, I don't know, maybe it's just me. It's like if you get the how was your week text, you're like, oh, there's like so much stuff to tell you. Versus if I've already had kind of this conversation about the car, I don't maybe feel like I have to give as big of a text response. Like I don't have to write 5 paragraphs about my week. I can just kind of give a couple bullet points. And maybe we'll keep talking and more will come out. But yeah, I think it gets the momentum going.
For sure. Another one of my little tips is that I always try, if somebody tells me that something's coming up that's important in their life, like I'll literally, my memory is the worst, but I'll make a little note on my calendar and then on that day, wish them luck or follow up the day after and say, hey, how did that go? I know that was important to you. And I mean, it means so much to people that in this busy environment that we're all living in, that people are thinking about them and rooting for them. And I mean, that's all of what keeps a friendship current, regardless of how distant you are, physically.
Linda, we could have done a whole episode on this. It sounds like you and I have a lot, but I love it because you're proving this thing that I say, like a lot of people are like, well, that sounds really, or maybe they're like, that's not very romantic or free flow, or like somehow we've been convinced that our friendships need to just be like, we spontaneously remember all these things, or it's like, no, it's okay to like write it down. It's okay to put it in your calendar. It's okay to like write a list of the people you want to reach out to this month and like get to the end of the month and make sure you've checked them all off. Like that stuff is okay. And honestly, that is how most people I talk to who are maintaining a good number of friendships are doing it, is they have habits and systems and lists and they follow through on that. So I appreciate you calling that out, because I think sometimes people think I've gone off the deep end. It's like, no, I think a lot of people are doing this. They just don't want to admit it because it makes you sound like, I don't know, you're not just thinking about your friends 24/7, but you're not. we're not. We're all balancing so many things. We are not thinking about our friends 24/7.
But I still want to know what's going on with them, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it's important. I mean, I always feel terrible when I talk to somebody and if I've forgotten, like, and they'll say like, oh yeah, my mom's out of the hospital. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I should have asked. That's an important thing. But we're all busy, right? That's why I know for me, I have to write it down or else it goes away. But I think one person in the relationship has to be like that. Most of my friends aren't like that. And a lot of my friends will say, oh, I knew I'd hear from you. And I'm glad to hear from you and that sort of thing. But I also think there needs to be some reciprocation. If you're constantly reaching out to someone and they're like, oh yeah, I'll get back to you. Like, oh, let's talk next week. I'll get back to you with some dates. And then you don't hear from them. Like, then you need to have a conversation perhaps, or just accept that's how they are. But I think there does need to be some exchange. I have one of my best friends who I enjoy picking up with all the time, like never remembers my birthday. And I actually don't care because I just know that's her mode of operation. And it's become like, we've turned it into a joke. So like the day after my birthday, I'll text her and be like, it was my birthday yesterday. And then she'll be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I forgot again. Happy birthday. But it's become like a joke. So it's like, there's different ways to handle it. And we just have to realize like managing our own expectations is like, I think the key of any relationship.
Yeah. But I'm sure she also does other things that are really wonderful that
for sure
feel reciprocating. I mean, I think like everybody has their strengths. Right. They're not always going to be the same. And birthdays may not be hers, it sounds like.
Exactly.
But she does other things. Linda, this has been such a rich conversation. And I'm so excited for people to hear, your experiences, but also all this like stuff at the end here about how you're approaching friendship. I know to you and I who are just doing this, it seems like, oh, everybody's not doing this, but they're not. No, you're not. But maybe more of them will. Do you have any final parting thoughts for any listeners, either about what it's like to come back to friendships or just friendship in general?
They say loneliness is the new epidemic in our country and probably in the world. And, maybe take a look in the mirror and assess like how connected you are and what the gaps are and what you can do about it, because it can really enrich your life having people that you enjoy. But it's bringing people that you enjoy and to what extent you feel like you need that connection into your life, not worrying about what other people are doing or what other people think. So I would just say, put yourself out there and bring what you want into your life.
I think that's a great place to end. Linda, thanks so much for being here and for doing the thing. You're out there doing the thing, I like to say. Like, you are prioritizing this, you're paying attention to it. And I so appreciate you sharing all your experiences for people to consider in their own lives.
Well, thanks for having me.
So, whether you are going through a big life shift at the moment and you're trying to figure out how to navigate this new version of yourself in your friendships, or if you had a friend who has recently had a big life change, I hope that this helps you navigate the other side of that friendship. I think that there were so many tangible tips and examples in this episode. I hope that it's one you can tuck away for any time you need it. And I would encourage you, if you listened to the end of the episode today where we talked about friendship habits and you thought to yourself, maybe I should try that, then I would challenge you to try and make one new friendship habit in your life. Whether that is writing down some reminders in your calendar of important events for your friends, or making a list of 3 people you want to reach out to this month, or maybe 3 a week. Maybe you schedule a block of time to do some check-ins or set up some friendship dates. Pick a habit and try and implement it in your life. And finally, if you are somebody who is like Linda, somebody who has picked up and moved across the world, or maybe that's what you want to do, Linda is an expat coach. You can sign up for her newsletter to receive 5 strategies to make the most out of your time abroad. And I'll drop the link in the show notes. And with that, I'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Friendship IRL. I am so honored to have these conversations with you, but don't let the chat die here. Send me a voice message. I created a special website just to chat with you. You can find it at alex.chat. You can also find me on Instagram. My handle It's Alex Alexander, or go ahead and leave a review wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. Now, if you want to take this conversation a step further, send this episode to a friend. Tell them you found it interesting and use what we just talked about as a conversation starter the next time you and your friend hang out. No need for a teary goodbye. I'll be back with a new episode next week.